Katie from Nerd Church here, and this is going to be the slightly more normal version of the very long and very weird video that I made, um, in which I was attempting to explain in my own very clumsy way that although it is indeed the case that, you know, 30 years ago, I was in fact a weird, creepy neo-pagan who was way too obsessed with Mesopotamia for her own or anyone else's good. And that I, you know, ultimately failed to create a neo-pagan revival of Babylonian religion in Arizona, and that was a good thing. And I can also see that if I had met a slightly different group of weirdos in graduate school, I could have pulled it off. Because I saw that and I saw the Y'all Need Ishtar t-shirt on Digital Hammurabi, and I stayed away from Digital Hammurabi for a really long time until I figured out what was going on and what Josh Bowen was all about. And I had to be really, really secure that A, he was a good guy, and B, that he was really, truly an atheist. Because I know about being neo-pagan in academia, and I know that you don't talk about it. We don't talk about there are some things we don't talk about if we want to have jobs. And that was who I used to be. And I saw that Y'all Need Ishtar t-shirt, and I felt like a former heroin addict who had just been told, no, fentanyl's safe. So I had to be real sure. And I also had to be real sure because I had to think long and hard about whether coming out as a former neo-pagan was going to do something that would cause people to view my current religious practice with suspicion. Because I don't care what people say about me on the internet, but there are Catholic priests whose opinion I care about. And they've been my confessor, and I have told them what I did, and they might have made me renew the I reject Satan and all his works part from the baptism. But when he was done, he clapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Get back at it, sister." So this is me getting it back at it. Okay, this is why I failed to start a cult. A, I have I have zero chill, and I have the charisma of paint. And I know you're thinking about this. Katie's a little bit weird, but she's smart and funny and she's good to talk to. Yeah, that's when I'm around smart people and preferably around neurodivergent people. You put me in a room of normal people who aren't raised on, geeky media and, PBS and all those things. No one wants to hang out with me because I'm weird. I'm too weird. I am too weird for some weird spaces. I was too weird for American neo-paganism, and if you know what I just said, you know what I just said. But let me talk to you about why I failed to start a cult. Well, first of all, I hooked in with the Church of All Worlds, which was falling apart, and well, it had actually fallen apart twice and resurrected and then fell apart again. But they were hard on the Odin is Zeus, is Loki, is, Loki is, Loki is the same as Mercury, is the same as Hermes. It is probably the same as Hermes Trismegistus, right? They were into this weird pantheism. And I was a theist. I might have wanted to be a polytheist, but I was a polytheist. And I 125% believed in the existence of Ishtar and in the fact that I had had some kind of a spiritual experience that caused myself to dedicate myself to her, which resulted in very little that was good in my life and a lot that was bad. And now I have a really complicated tattoo that I might be able to resolve into something that is acceptably iconography Catholic, or not. But luckily it's under my clothes. And as you can see in the picture that I used as the thumbnail for this, I can put on the armor of God and look like a good church lady. So, maybe I have an embarrassing tattoo. Nobody needs to see it. Nobody's gonna see it unless you brave the horrible wilds of me just over talking and over explaining my life. But what does this mean? This means biblical studies scholars, help me help you. Because I actually know what it is like to sit in a group of people who don't believe in any theistic concept, who don't really believe in God in the sense that you believe in God, right? They believe that there might be like a god and a goddess and all that, they're all really the same kind of. And I have tried to go into that space and sell them on a specific deity, and no one was buying. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to try to port Mesopotamian mythology onto people's heads that fundamentally exist in terms of Roman legal structures and have essentially rejected the concept of religious law as a concept. I know what that's like. I know how it works. I know what it feels like. Maybe I'm not a first century Christian, but both of my parents were Christian. My mom's family, okay, I couldn't, excuse me for a moment, I'm going to speak Catholic. Okay, so this is me speaking Catholic to the picture of the Pope that I have in my room, not because I pray to the Pope, but because it's a reminder of me to pray to the Pope, to pray for the Pope, to God for the good of the Pope. So I'm just going to be looking at Leo, and I'm just going to say this real quick. Okay, Your Holiness, Holy Father, Pope Leo, I have prayed for you. And I think that there is a very good chance that the reason why, other than the lack of nuclear exchange in the 1980s, the fact that my grandmother was born in 1936, got sick, and her grandmother and her mother baptized her in a valid, if not licit, Catholic baptism, and had dedicated her to Our Lady of Loreto, is the reason why everything I did failed, and ultimately I came back to the church. By the grace of God, by the blessing of his mother, my soul was saved, and the souls of my children were saved. And possibly even a lot more souls than that. Okay, I have done being incredibly Catholic. But what I am trying to say is that I actually know what it's like to be in a family that is raised in some kind of funky, not quite Orthodox Christianity that flirted with Catholicism for, let's call it 100 years on one side. And then another family that's been Catholic since the word go, but maybe my dad's theology got kind of whack. And I was baptized a Catholic. Yeah, I was baptized a Catholic. My first known Christian ancestor on my dad's side, there is a non-zero chance he really was baptized by St. Patrick. So, I don't know. If you're somebody who has a problem with converts because you think converts are all trad, does that give, does Patrick cancel out the Methodists on my mom's side, or do I need to work harder to prove my limpieza de sangre? Okay, that was an irrelevant comment that you don't need to know if you're an evangelical Bible scholar or an ex-evangelical Bible scholar or a secular Bible scholar. But the point is, I said that because there are people listening to this video who will need to hear that if they're going to believe anything that comes out of my mouth, ever. Because this is what I'm saying. I know what it's like to see somebody raised without religion just hear about Christianity and decide that that sounds good to them. I have seen it, of course it's not identical to the first couple centuries of Christianity. Nothing is ever identical to anything else, but my experience is probably closer to the experience of, say, St. Augustine's mom than, I don't know, like your mom's experience was to St. Augustine's mom. And, you know, maybe it would be interesting for somebody to actually sit down and talk to someone about that, to understand maybe what it feels like from the inside. I just hope that there's like some like scholars of early Christianity that are really interested in getting inside the heads of some of these people, because I'm seeing a lot of people who are really good text scholars who will sit down and go into into like a postmodern level of like parsing what the word is. And you know what? We need that. But we also need people who will say, okay, why do we care? What does this mean? How does this help us understand the human condition? Because we're getting to the point where just the fact that you are studying the Bible is not going to be enough to interest people, because there's a lot of people that are like, dude, I do not care. And I can already see it, because I can already see the way that evangelicals or people who were raised in that world are just not interested in understanding the fact, or at least have not been made aware of the fact, that there are people in the world alive today whose understanding of theology is at least in a direct line. But if I can't get you to understand that, like, the Pope means it when he quotes St. Augustine, and he does not mean that women should be sex slaves or breeding machines, if I can't communicate that, I don't know how I can communicate the way that it feels to fight between gods, to fight between religions, and finally put your money down on the one that you choose. I don't know if I can convey that, but I would like to try. So that's why I'm putting this out here.